Caros amigos, esta noite temos um convidado muito especial. É com muita honra que vamos recebê-lo aqui no nosso sofá encarnado. É atualmente chefe do gabinete do Senador Sheldon Whitehouse. Para além de muito mais, advogado de profissão, vamos correr toda a carreira, é português e vem cá contar a sua história. Senhoras e senhores, é com imenso gosto que damos as boas-vindas a George Carvalho. Seja bem-vindo.
Tudo bem, senhor?
Está tudo bem.
Obrigado.
Tudo bem, menos o facto que acabaste de me chamar senhor. Isso não vai acontecer mais hoje.
Ok, está bom.
George, és português, mas nasceste nos Estados Unidos, não é?
Aqui, yeah. O meu português é assim. So maybe I'll speak in English
we'll
a little
go back
bit.
and forth.
Okay.
We'll go back and forth. Os teus pais são de onde, em Portugal?
Minha mãe nasceu aqui, nasceu no South Attleboro, Massachusetts. E meu pai é de São Mamed, em Portugal.
Sim, na área de Leiria, não é?
Yeah.
São Mamed. O meu sogro é dessa zona. É muito interessante.
Yeah.
Mas a sua mãe era de raízes portuguesas ou não?
Não, ela era portuguesa. Monteiro era o nome dela. E a família dela é do Vila Nova de Tazam, perto do Gouveia.
Sim, conheço.
Na Serra.
Aliás,
muito bonito.
Tem um amigo dessa zona, talvez até é um amigo comum.
Primo, pode ser.
O Fred Felix é artista.
Eu sei dele, eu conheço.
Eu acho que a família é dessa zona.
George,
foste criado num ambiente português ou na altura os teus pais a tentar adaptar-se mais à cultura americana?
Assim. You know, both. It was both. We had a lot of Portuguese traditions which we followed. We were patrons of St. Anthony's Church and then also St. Joseph's Church, but St. Anthony was my grandfather's church, although my grandfather and grandmother were married in St. Joseph's Church in Pawtucket, which I know you're familiar with.
Yes.
And, but we learned the traditions, we followed the traditions, the festas and the Christmas was always, we always had the povo and the peixe and get the whole family together. We had a big family at the time. Unfortunately, a lot of them have passed and we missed that. But I grew up in Pawtucket, which when I was growing up, the Portuguese community was starting to build in that area. A lot of them in Pawtucket and Cumberland at that time had come from the zone where my grandfather was from, in that Gouveia area, in the Serra. And then we saw an influx of a lot of people from the Azores who came in, and I think they've dominated. I think in Rhode Island now, the majority of people who are here, I'm not 100% sure, but I would say they're from the Azores.
A majority. Now, George, did you ever go back to Portugal as a child?
No.
As a child, no.
We didn't have any money. We just could not afford to do that. So the first time I went to Portugal, I went to the Azores with our good friend Al Arujo, and we stayed in one of his cousin's house in Puvação. Which is a beautiful village, and it was a very nice home, and he had cows. I said to Al, it was the first good night's sleep that I had in quite some time. So we went out there for the festa, the Holy the Spirit festival in May, and this was in 2001, right before 9/11. And since then, I've been back to the Azores on 2 other occasions, and I've been to the mainland 3 times.
Excellent.
And my wife, who is Irish and English, and my daughter, who's Portuguese and obviously Irish and English, they love it. They've never been to the Azores, but they've been to the continent, and my wife is always saying, we got to buy a house there. I want to retire there. She doesn't even talk about retiring. She says, why don't we just move now? And I said, well, honey, there's a little problem. We have to find jobs, and we're not going to be lawyers. She's a lawyer as well. So we're not going to be lawyers in Portugal. So it's just not going to happen. So,
but that's great. That's great that and Portugal is very much an in-country right now.
Oh yeah,
people
absolutely.
are loving Portugal. It's a top tourist destination.
Absolutely.
I guess it was just a secret that we've known about for years that people just started figuring out.
When I went to the Azores in 2001, and then I forgot what year I went again. That was a pleasure trip. The next time I went, I was on, and I think you may have met him, a gentleman named Jim McGlinchey, who was a State Department. He was a diplomat. Mm-hmm. He worked for the Luso-American Development Foundation, and they started a project. There was funding given to Mr. McGlinchey, and he became the director of this project, to try to increase Portuguese Americans vote at a high ratio, so to begin with, but the government was interested in, the Portuguese government was interested in increasing it even more. So he formed a board. I acted as their legal counsel, and we did studies and merged, the voter database with the clubs here. It was Massachusetts, New Bedford, Fall River, Rhode Island, California, New Jersey, and we discovered that Portuguese Americans vote at a higher percentage than other populations, but that there was also room for improvement. So we spent, I want to say it was about 10 years or so, trying to build that up through outreach, and I think we did. But that last trip was to the Azores, was a trip for the board meeting, and we met with Portuguese Azorean officials in Ponta Delgada, and they were really pushing at that time to increase tourism. And now I haven't seen it, but I understand they've built a beautiful area on a marina in the Avenida in Ponta Delgada. They've got cruise ships coming in, and so it's beautiful to see that. It's wonderful to see that.
It is, absolutely, and hopefully they can take advantage of that like they should. Going back to your story, George, and going back to Pawtucket, you're a St. Ray's alumni, right?
I am.
After graduating from high school, did you know that you wanted to pursue a law career?
Probably not. I wasn't the greatest student in the world. I played sports, and I was, I had my challenges at times. My brother was a much better student than I did. He had a very good, I think almost a full package to University of Massachusetts here in Dartmouth. But I was not. I was a mediocre student, so obviously I had to build my grades up. So I went to college, graduated from Roger Williams University, and then again I didn't have the financial ability at the time to go right to law school. I was fortunate enough that with the help of my mom and working to save to pay for Roger Williams without having to take a loan out, which is very difficult to do now. The tuition was much cheaper. This is back in the 80s. But so I worked for 2 years for the Pawtucket Housing Authority, and I was a laborer. I was in the laborers union, and I painted, I plumbed, I did sheetrocking, and
you paid your dues.
But and I was still living at home, and so I made enough money to save to go to law school. Unfortunately, I had some loans at the end, but I didn't have, because I see now in the job where we are now, we do a lot of casework and with people calling and who need assistance. And that's one of our biggest caseloads is students who are getting out of college or law school or medical school, whatever, with astronomical debt. Debt, $150,000, $200,000 in debt. They're in a position where they're not going to be able to buy a house for a while.
Absolutely.
I mean, my first mortgage on a house was $70,000, and that just doesn't happen these days.
Absolutely not, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse. Where a lot of people are now questioning: is it even worth going to college?
Yeah.
Because then we'll be in debt for a great part of the rest of their lives. So
there's a lot
unfortunately,
there's a lot to be said, and a lot of you see it more with the high school, some of the high schools now, and then colleges to go into that tech field, because there is a need, to have these workers who, can work in the tech field or the labor field. You look at like Quonset Point, in Rhode Island, where, Electric Boat, they're building submarines. Those are high-paying, high-skill jobs where you don't necessarily need a college education, but you need to have the training to do that work.
Absolutely.
So,
what attracted you to the law field specifically when you did finally make that decision?
I had in college, I had my degree was in political science, paralegal, and I had a minor in business administration. So I enjoyed it. I started taking legal classes at Roger Williams, which at that time didn't have a law school. It was just the undergrad. They didn't even have they were building the architecture school at the time. So it was a much different campus, but it was a good school. I had good training there, and I really liked it. So by the time I was ready to graduate, I knew I wanted to go to law school. So I said, but I just can't afford it. So I took the time off, made some money, and then applied, and fortunately got into Michigan State University.
Now, what kind of law did you practice? Were you a defense attorney? Did you? Yes.
No. Well, I did. Yeah, I didn't work in any government capacity at the time. When I got out, I was doing work for a firm in Boston that specialized in employment law. So what the firm did was they contracted with the federal government, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, to investigate and issue reports to the government on particular cases involving federal employees who had alleged discrimination. So we would investigate the case, we'd take the statements from the individuals, gather the evidence, put a report together, and that would go to the EEOC to make a determination. So I did that, and then I came back to Rhode Island, and I practiced with 3 older gentlemen. I was just a young punk who, really didn't, I'm still trying to, because it takes you a while to learn. And I was so fortunate, I practiced with now Judge Dan Procaccini of the Superior Court, Steve Cicilline, who's retired, and David Cicilline's uncle, the congressman in Rhode Island, and Freddie Veltri. And they taught me so much. They taught me about the business, they taught me about the work. And we had a nice practice in that we all kind of did our different things. I did just about everything, except I wouldn't touch workers' comp or bankruptcy because it was too complicated. But we each had our own little niche. And I did some case, criminal stuff, some personal injury, real estate, wills and trusts, and then I did that for a few years, and then I got involved in politics a little bit more.
And I want to touch upon that because your initial involvement with politics, and correct me if I'm wrong, you actually ran for office in Pawtucket, correct?
Yeah. Well, my first, I had always been involved, and my family too, helping out. Never ran for political office. Nobody in the family, my immediate family, but we had always helped out candidates that we liked and thought would do a good job. So I had worked, in fact, my wife had moved to Rhode Island. She was a year behind me in law school. So she did her last year here in Boston at New England University and lived in Pawtucket. So she and I worked on Bob Mativia's campaign. I don't know if you remember Bob Mativia, who was the mayor, became mayor of Pawtucket after the problems that the city had. So we helped him out along with a lot of other people, and he won. And then he appointed me to the zoning board in Pawtucket, and I served on the zoning board. I resigned to run for office in '97, but I ended up serving for a little over 10 years. So that was really my first official jump into politics. And then, as you said, I ran in 1997. I want to say there were 13 of us who ran for council. It was council at large, which is citywide. You represent the entire city. So it was a very good learning experience for me. I had worked on campaigns, but had never been the candidate, so it was a little different being the candidate. But we ran. I didn't win. In fact, I lost to one of the individuals that I lost to was now Mayor Don Grebian. And I always say to the mayor, it's the best thing that ever happened to me was to lose to you, because had I won and gone on the council, I probably would not have accepted the jobs that I've accepted, along the way. you know, he was a great, Don was a great councilman. He's been, I think, a great mayor. But yeah, so it was a blessing in disguise that I lost. I was not, you know, obviously not happy to lose, but you know, you try, you try to do the right thing. And then after that, the new mayor, Jim Doyle, reappointed me back to the zoning board. Yeah.
Why politics? You had your profession. You were a lawyer. Why the involvement in politics?
I've always enjoyed it, you know, and then I've always felt that if you can get good people to run and win and take office, that it makes things better. And I've been very fortunate to work for three, you know, honest, sincere, hardworking, you know, elected officials. Bob Mativia, as I said, with the zoning board, then Paul Tavares, who was our general treasurer, and now Sheldon Whitehouse. So it's just, and it really was, with respect to Paul Tavares, when he was elected treasurer, it was not something that I expected. I was practicing, the practice was going well, I enjoyed practicing, I had my partners, we got along very well. But it was Al Arujo who introduced me to Paul Tavares, and I liked Paul. You know, we hit it off right away, and I helped in mainly the Blackstone Valley, you know, in the election. And one day I got a call from him and said, "Look, you know, I want to meet with you, and I want to meet Billy Castro, who I think you may know, former senator from East Providence, who was the campaign manager." He said, "Billy and I want to meet with you." I went to the campaign headquarters not knowing what the meeting was about, and he said, "I'd like you to be my legal counsel for, you know, in the treasurer's office." So I was a little stunned, honored, obviously, and excited, but I wanted to, you know, I'm not sure what he expected. We never really talked about it after that, but I said, you know, I'm honored, I really, but I need to talk to my wife, because you know, I need to make sure that she's on board with this before I do anything. And at the time, you know, she was practicing, I was practicing. We didn't have any children at the time, so it was a good opportunity to go and, you know, work in state government. So I did that for 8 years. I was the last one to leave when we, you know, after he retired. When he retired, I was the last one to go. I locked the door on the way out. Wow. The last day. But I started as his chief legal counsel, then I became his deputy, the deputy treasurer for the state, and then he appointed me as chief of staff.
Now, after Treasurer Tavares, now you said you were the last one to leave, so you locked the office. You didn't stay in that capacity for the next elected treasurer. For some reason I thought you did. No.
That would have been Treasurer Tavares was in office. He took office in January of '99, left in December or beginning of January of 2007, so end of 2006.
And so at that time, the then Attorney General of Rhode Island, Sheldon Whitehouse,
he was not Attorney General at the time. He had run for governor and lost. So he was in private practice, but he had run. He was running for Senate. And we always had a good relationship with, you know, Paul and Sheldon are good friends, and we worked very well together when Paul was treasurer and Sheldon was Attorney General. So Sheldon had asked me to be the treasurer of his campaign. This is while I was still working for Paul, and I accepted. And then again, to my surprise, he asked me to come and work in the office, which again, I did not expect that. I was looking at a couple of opportunities, but I still had the ability to go back to I never left I wasn't practicing, but I still had the practice in place, which my partners were taking care of. So my thought was, either one of the opportunities that I had been presented to me, or I would go back to practice again. So
now, once he was elected for the first term, were you chief of staff right from the get-go?
I was I'm state director in Rhode Island. So yeah, I was appointed his state director here, and I've been there
12 years, right?
This is 13 now, yeah.
And how has this experience been? Because now we're talking about a national level. Of course, you're dealing with the Rhode Island affairs, right?
Yeah.
But how was that as far as the transition from first the municipal level, then you're working statewide,
Yeah.
now it's a national level. So what were the big differences?
I say this to people all the time, and I really enjoyed, I enjoyed, being on the zoning board in Pawtucket, because you could have impact on people's lives one way or the other, and hopefully positively. Absolutely. Because you want people to be able to, as long as it's reasonable, to be able to add to their property, or put a deck on, or to be able to enjoy their property. And then the state level, again, it was the treasurer's office. Paul Tavares used to call it the banker. I'm the banker for the state. So we did the investments. We did the investments. We oversaw the payments and everything else. But this job in the Senate is the best job I've ever had. And again, no offense to the others, because the other jobs were great. But if you like to help people, it's the best job in the world. You'll never get rich doing this job, but there's satisfaction almost on a daily basis that when somebody calls, and sometimes they're desperate, sometimes they are in trouble, or they need help with something, and you're able to work them through it. It's a good feeling, and we have a great staff. We have a number of caseworkers in the office. So we do the casework, which is a big part of the office. We also do the policy and work on legislation and things of that nature. But personally, for me, I don't do the casework. I have people in the office doing it, but I get involved in some cases if they're a little more complicated, or if they need to come in and ask me their advice, how should I proceed. And when I say casework, it's everything. Somebody's having a problem with Social Security, somebody's having a problem with immigration, somebody wants a visa, or they're applying for citizenship, or passports. We've had people who have called us, they are leaving. What time is it? They're leaving at whatever, 5 o'clock on a Friday night to get to Boston to get a 9 o'clock flight, and they realize, oh my God, I don't have my passport. So we've had cases where if they called us during the day, we've been able to get them their passport so they can still make the trip. So it's good stories like that where the person's happy and you accomplish what seemed to be the impossible at the time.
What seems to be the biggest problem that the residents of Rhode Island called to complain about?
They call to complain every day about Sheldon, or about Congress in general. It goes in waves. It really depends on what's going on. When we had the housing crisis, it was housing. We had hundreds and hundreds of open cases dealing with housing and mortgage foreclosures. And not that we can stop that. We can't. I don't want to make that representation to your viewers that we can stop a foreclosure, but we can offer maybe solutions to it, or work with Fannie Mae or the federal government in some way to try to give them some relief. So maybe they, the problem at the time was unemployment was so high that you had families that, unfortunately, the mother and father both lost their jobs. They both lost their jobs. So you had no income coming in, and those were really sad and very difficult cases. We had a huge influx of cases back in 2010 when we had the floods. If you remember, we had those terrible floods where it rained for a period of days, and we had a lot of property that was destroyed, and houses that were destroyed. So after President Obama declared the disaster here, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, came in, and we dealt with them, to try to help citizens. And it's no secret, they're not always the easiest agency to deal with. So we had our battles with them to try to make sure that, you know, residents in Rhode Island were treated fairly. And it was, you know, obviously it was Massachusetts was involved, Vermont, you know, all of New England suffered through that. So it really varies with, you know, there's been, we get a lot of calls now on immigration because of some of the rhetoric that is coming from our fine president's office. So we, you know, we have those issues that we deal with.
And we'll touch upon that in just a little bit. But you explained why it's gratifying to be in this job. But what's one of the most difficult aspects of holding your position?
Most difficult? I've never really thought about it. I mean, I think it you know, some of it is public scrutiny, and you know, not only for the senators or the elected, but also the staff. You know, I always tell the staff, you know, you're a representative of this office 24 hours a day, so don't do anything crazy. You know, don't. You know, and with all this social media,
absolutely.
You know, you've got Facebook, you've got Twitter. You know, so you've got to be careful, and I tell them to be careful. You know, don't put yourself in a position where you know, are going to be embarrassed, and then obviously embarrass the office. So that's, you know, that's probably the biggest challenge. You know, just the public scrutiny in general, and I think that to some extent causes some good people not to run because they don't want to be under that microscope.
Now, there are a handful of senators that seem to make the media rounds or show up more in the media aspect than others. Senator Whitehouse is one of them. How does that change the way you live? Obviously, you have to be careful. You're a public representative, as you just mentioned. But being that the senator is so visible, how does that change the way you live your day to day?
You know, I've always tried to. You know, I live a very simple life. I don't live an extravagant lifestyle. I've always tried to keep a low profile, and you know, and I continue to do that. You know, you asked about calls to the office earlier. You know, we get calls that vary, you know, on a daily basis. You know, you get a lot of people who call and saying, you know, he's doing a great job. Your office is doing a great job. We love you. Keep up the good work. And then you get a lot of calls where there's a lot of criticism. And I generally, you know, I've said to my staff is just let them go. Don't get into an argument with them. There's no need for that. You're not going to win. You're not going to change their mind. And really, that's how, you know, people who know who I am, and if they want to come up and, you know, start yelling and screaming, I just let them go and let them vent. And most time it works out better that way than to actually engage in a debate, because you're not going to change. If somebody's got their mind set on something, and
all it takes is
one a 2-minute conversation,
poorly placed word, and all of a sudden we're in the middle of the mud. So.
Which I like to stay out of the mud.
So George, we're going to take a break. We'll be back to talk a little bit about current affairs and things that are going on in the country. Senhoras e senhores, estamos esta noite com Jorge Carvalho, que é chefe de gabinete em Rhode Island do senador Sheldon Whitehouse. Voltaremos com mais conversas já a seguir. Fique connosco.